In the heart of Millfield's annual Harvest Festival, a quiet librarian was about to shatter 10 years of carefully constructed lies. What started as a peaceful community celebration took a shocking turn when masked gunmen opened fire on families and children. Elena Ramirez wasn't your typical small-town librarian. For over a decade, she had spent her life hiding behind book stacks and circulation desks, known for her gentle demeanor and devotion to her teenage daughter. But before Millfield, she had been Elena Santos, a military sniper whose precision was legendary in the mountains of Afghanistan. When she witnessed a gunman targeting a group of children near the face-painting station, she had no idea that her next decision would expose everything she'd worked to bury. Elena grabbed a deputy's abandoned rifle and made an impossible shot across the festival grounds, a display of skill that would shatter her quiet civilian facade forever. What began as a mother's desperate attempt to protect innocent lives would become a reckoning with ghosts from her military past. The peaceful town of Millfield would never be the same after learning that their beloved librarian was one of the most lethal snipers the Army had ever trained, and that her enemies had finally found her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The grandfather clock in the corner of Millfield Public Library chimed 9:30, its deep bronze notes echoing through empty aisles lined with worn paperbacks and forgotten histories. Elena Ramirez moved between the stacks with practiced silence, her soft-soled shoes making no sound against the polished hardwood floors. She'd learned long ago that silence could mean survival. Her fingers traced along book spines as she worked, automatically cataloging titles and authors while her eyes performed a different inventory entirely. Exit routes, blind spots, the large windows facing Main Street that offered both visibility and vulnerability. Old habits died hard, if they died at all. Mom, are you seriously going to spend another Friday night reorganizing the biography section? Sophia's voice carried that particular teenage blend of exasperation and affection that had become the soundtrack of Elena's evenings. At 15, Sophia possessed her mother's dark eyes, but none of her careful restraint. Where Elena moved with measured precision, Sophia sprawled across the circulation desk like she owned the place, her backpack spilling notebooks and art supplies across the polished oak surface. "Someone has to keep Mrs. Patterson's memoir from wandering into the cooking section again," Elena replied, though her tone held warmth. She glanced toward the front windows, a movement so subtle it seemed unconscious. The street was empty, except for the amber glow of streetlights creating pools of illumination in the October darkness. "You know what I think?" Sophia swung her legs, worn combat boots, a thrift store find she declared vintage authentic, thumping against the desk. "I think you like it here because nothing ever happens. Zero excitement. Maximum boring." Elena's hand paused on a biography of Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier of World War II. "Boring can be good," she said quietly. "Boring means safe." "Safe from what? This is Millfield, Ohio, population 8,000 and shrinking. The most dangerous thing that happens here is Mrs. Chen's driving." Sophia's laugh was bright and uncomplicated, the sound of someone who never needed to fear the dark. "If only you knew," Elena thought, her fingers unconsciously adjusting the long sleeves that covered the faded scar tissue along her left forearm. Instead, she smiled and moved to the next shelf. "Finish your homework. We'll leave in 10 minutes. The truth was, Elena had chosen Millfield precisely for its predictable mediocrity. Small enough that strangers stood out, quiet enough that unusual sounds carried meaning, isolated enough that her past couldn't follow her here. Or so she had believed for the last 10 years. As Elena locked the library's heavy oak doors, her reflection caught in the glass, a woman of 35 who could pass for younger, with the kind of understated attractiveness that drew little attention. Average height, shoulder-length black hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, clothes that suggested competence rather than style. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she could put a bullet through a playing card at 800 meters. Walking home through Millfield's sleepy residential streets, Sophia chattered about her art class project, while Elena's attention divided between her daughter's voice and the subtle wrongness she couldn't quite identify. A car parked where no car had been yesterday, a porch light that usually stayed on now dark, curtains drawn in windows that typically remained open. Maybe paranoia, maybe survival instinct. After a decade of peace, it's hard to tell the difference. Their house sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest two-story colonial with blue shutters and a small garden that Elena tended with the same methodical care she brought to everything else. As they approached the front steps, she noticed the slight displacement of the welcome mat, the barely perceptible scuff mark on the porch railing. Someone had been here. "Go inside and start your homework," Elena said, her voice carrying a note of authority that made Sophia look up sharply. "Mom, is everything—" "Now, Sophia." Elena waited until she heard the front door close before walking the perimeter of their property. Nothing obvious, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, but someone with training had been here, someone who knew how to look without leaving obvious traces. Inside, she found Sophia at the kitchen table, calculus textbook open, but her attention focused on her mother's face. "You have that look again," Sophia said. "What look?" "Like you're listening for something that isn't there." Sophia's voice carried a note of concern that made Elena's chest tighten. "You've been doing it more lately, the watching thing, the listening thing." Elena busied herself making tea, needing the familiar ritual to steady her hands. "I'm just tired. Long day." "You're always tired after long days at the library. This is different." Sophia closed her textbook with a decisive snap. "Mom, I'm not a little kid anymore. If something's wrong, nothing's wrong." The lie came easily, perfected by years of practice. "I'm just being careful. A woman living alone with her daughter should be careful." Sophia's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she returned to her homework without further questions. Elena made her tea and retreated to the living room, where she could watch both the front and back approaches to the house while appearing to read a novel. Outside, Millfield settled into its typical evening quiet. Dogs barked in distant yards. Television light flickered behind drawn curtains. Mrs. Patterson's ancient Buick coughed to life as she returned from her weekly bridge game. Normal sounds, safe sounds. But Elena sat in her comfortable chair, holding her cooling tea, and wondered how long normal would last. The Millfield Police Department occupied a converted Victorian mansion on the town square, its original elegance somewhat compromised by the addition of radio antennas and bulletproof glass at the front desk. Elena had walked past it countless times over the years, but had never had a reason to go inside until Sergeant David Cole came looking for her. She was processing returns when his shadow fell across the circulation desk, and she looked up to find a face that belonged to another life entirely. 10 years had added gray to his temples and lines around his eyes, but David Cole still moved with the compact efficiency of a soldier. His uniform was crisp, his posture military straight, and when their eyes met, Elena saw a flash of recognition that felt like stepping on a landmine. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm Sergeant Cole with the Millfield Police. I was wondering if I could have a few minutes of your time." Elena's hands remained steady as she set down the returned books, but her pulse had accelerated to combat rhythm. "Of course, Sergeant. How can I help you?" David glanced around the empty library, taking in the peaceful quiet with the same tactical assessment Elena performed daily. "Maybe somewhere private." She led him to the small office behind the circulation desk, acutely aware of Sophia doing homework at a table near the windows. The office was cramped, filled with filing cabinets and stacks of book orders, but it offered the illusion of privacy. "Elena Ramirez," David said, once she'd closed the door. "Not a question." "Yes. Though I knew you by a different name once." His voice carried no accusation, only a weight of shared history. Elena sat behind her desk, using the familiar barrier to maintain distance. "I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else, Sergeant." "Phantom 6, that's what they called you. Ghost in the mountains." For a moment, the library office disappeared, replaced with rocky Afghani hillsides and the thin air of high-altitude surveillance. The smell of gun oil and dust,
the weight of a rifle that had become an extension of her body. The voice in her earpiece, calm and steady. "Phantom 6, you have the shot." "I think you've made a mistake," Elena said, though her voice had lost some of its steadiness. David reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a small photograph, placing it carefully on the desk between them. The image was faded and creased, but it showed two soldiers in desert camouflage sharing a rare moment of levity beside a military vehicle. The woman's face was younger, harder, but unmistakably Elena's. "You saved my life," David said, simply. "Kandahar Province, November 2013. I was your spotter for 8 months. I think I'd remember." Elena stared at the photograph, her carefully constructed world threatening to collapse around the edges. "What do you want?" "I want to know if you're her. If Elena Ramirez, the librarian, is really Elena Santos, the sniper who could thread a needle at 1,000 yards."
Why does it matter? David leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I think we might have a problem. Strange activity on the outskirts of town, men who move like they have training, equipment shipments to abandoned buildings, the kind of things that used to worry us overseas." Elena's mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. "You think someone's found me? I think someone's planning something, and if you're who I think you are, you might be the only person in this town who'd recognize the signs." Through the office window, Elena could see Sophia bent over her textbook, completely absorbed in her homework, and blissfully unaware that her mother's past was walking through the front door of their quiet life. "I need you to leave," Elena said finally. "Elena!" "Now." Her voice carried an edge of command that made David straighten instinctively. "Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you remember, it doesn't matter. That person doesn't exist anymore." David stood slowly, his expression disappointed but not surprised. "She existed long enough to save lives, including mine." He paused at the door. "If you change your mind, if you remember that you're someone who protects people, you know where to find me." After he left, Elena sat in the tiny office, staring at the photograph he'd left behind. Two soldiers who'd trusted each other with their lives, who'd shared the intimate bond of sniper and spotter. She thought that part of her was buried so deep it could never resurface. "Mom?" Sophia's voice from the doorway made Elena quickly slide the photograph into a desk drawer. "Who was that police officer? You looked like you'd seen a ghost." "Just routine questions about library security," Elena lied, hating how easily the deception came. "Nothing important." But as she watched Sophia return to her homework, Elena's mind was already analyzing patterns, calculating angles, and remembering skills she'd spent 10 years trying to forget. Because if David was right, if someone was planning something in their quiet town, then Elena Ramirez, the librarian, might not be enough to protect what mattered most. She might need to remember how to be Phantom 6. Sophia had always known her mother kept secrets. Every family had them: private disappointments, embarrassing relatives, financial struggles that adults discussed in whispers after bedtime. But normal secrets didn't explain why Elena's eyes automatically tracked exit routes, or why she flinched at the sound of car backfires, or why she sometimes stood at their bedroom window for long minutes, watching the street with the intensity of a sentry. The storage box, hidden in the far corner of their attic, was not supposed to exist. Sophia discovered it on a rainy Saturday while searching for Halloween decorations, moving aside dusty Christmas ornaments and outgrown winter clothes. The box was small, military green, and secured with a lock that had seen better days. The metal was scratched and dented, like it had traveled far from home. Any reasonable 15-year-old would have asked permission to open it. Sophia had never been particularly reasonable. The lock was old, the mechanism worn, and Sophia's art class had given her a surprisingly useful knowledge of small metal tools. It took 20 minutes of careful work before the hasp clicked open. Inside, wrapped in faded olive cloth, she found pieces of a puzzle that transformed her understanding of Elena Ramirez entirely. Dog tags bearing a different name: Santos, Elena, M. Blood type O negative, no religious preference.
The metal was tarnished, but the chain showed the kind of wear that came from years of daily contact with skin. A military patch showing a skull wearing a beret, surrounded by text too faded to read clearly, but Sophia could make out enough. Sniper school, 1 shot, 1 kill. A photograph of 2 soldiers in desert camouflage, their faces sun-darkened and serious. The woman was unmistakably her mother, but transformed. Harder, leaner, with eyes that held a different kind of knowledge. Beside her stood a man Sophia had seen just yesterday in the library, though he'd been wearing a police uniform instead of military gear. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in plastic, lay a compass and a small leather journal filled with her mother's handwriting. She opened it randomly and found entries that made no sense. Target eliminated 847 meters. Clean shot. Extract complete. Phantom 6, recording mission success. Package delivered safely. Rodriguez didn't make it home. I should have seen the sniper first. I should have been faster. Sophia sat in the dusty attic, rain drumming against the roof, holding evidence that her mother had been someone entirely different from the quiet librarian who made her breakfast every morning and worried about overdue book fines. The sound of Elena's car in the driveway sent Sophia scrambling to replace everything exactly as she had found it, but her hands were shaking and she couldn't quite get the cloth folded the same way. By the time Elena called up the stairs, Sophia had closed the box and shoved it back into its corner, but the lock hung open, betraying her discovery. Sophia, did you find the decorations?
Still looking. Sophia's voice cracked slightly on the words. That evening, Elena heated leftover soup while Sophia pushed vegetables around her bowl, working up the courage for questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "Mom," she finally said, "were you ever in the army?" Elena's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "What makes you ask that?" "Just curious. You have scars on your arms. You know things about guns from movies. You get tense when helicopters fly over. Lots of people have scars, and I watch the news." Sophia set down her spoon with more force than necessary. "Why won't you just answer the question?" "Because it's not important." Elena's voice carried that particular tone of maternal authority that usually ended discussions. "My life started when you were born. Everything before that is ancient history." "What if I want to know about ancient history?" "Some stories aren't worth telling." Sophia studied her mother's face, looking for cracks in the composed facade. "What if they are? What if knowing where you came from helps me understand where I'm going?" Elena stood abruptly, carrying her bowl to the sink with movements that seemed too controlled, too careful. "Some stories only bring pain, Sophia. I've spent years making sure you never have to carry that kind of weight. Maybe that should be my choice." "You're 15. I'm old enough to know my mother is lying to me." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and accusatory. Elena's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. "I'm protecting you." "From what?" Elena's reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman caught between worlds, between the truth she'd buried and the daughter who deserved honesty. But before she could answer, the phone rang. "Miss Ramirez?" The voice on the other end was Police Chief Martinez, and he sounded troubled. "I'm sorry to call so late, but we've had an incident, a break-in at the Henderson's place on Oak Street. Thing is, whoever did it knew exactly what they were looking for. Professional job. Sergeant Cole thought you might want to know, considering—" Elena's grip tightened on the phone. "Considering what?" "Well, you're our librarian. Quiet neighborhood like this, figured you'd want to know about unusual activity." After she hung up, Sophia was watching her with new intensity. "What was that about?" "Neighborhood security," Elena said, but her mind was already racing through tactical implications. A professional burglary in a town where people left their doors unlocked suggested someone was gathering intelligence, mapping the area, identifying resources and vulnerabilities. Someone was preparing for something larger. "Mom," Sophia said quietly, "I found the box in the attic." Elena went very still. When she turned, her expression was unreadable. "We need to talk."
Really talk. Because that police officer yesterday knew you. I could see it. And this burglary isn't random, is it? Someone is looking for you." Elena stared at her daughter, this fierce, intelligent young woman who'd inherited her father's artistic soul and her mother's stubborn courage, and realized that the quiet life she'd built was crumbling around the edges. Outside, October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the darkness beyond Millfield's safe suburban streets, someone who knew her real name was planning their next move. The time for protective lies was running out. The Millfield Harvest Festival had been a town tradition for 63 years, transforming the central square into a maze of craft booths, food trucks, and carnival games that drew families from 3 counties. Elena had always loved the controlled chaos, children's laughter mixing with bluegrass music, the smell of kettle corn and apple cider, the comfortable predictability of small-town celebration. This year felt different. She stood near the dunking booth, watching Sophia help face paint younger children, but her attention was divided among the crowd's subtle wrongness. Too many unfamiliar faces, men who moved with military bearing but wore civilian clothes, vehicles parked at strategic points around the square's perimeter. "You feel it too." David Cole appeared beside her, his off-duty clothes doing nothing to disguise his alertness. "Been watching them for an hour. They're good, but not perfect." "How many?" Elena's voice was barely audible above the festival noise. "At least 6 that I've identified. Probably more." David's hand rested casually near his concealed weapon. "Professional spacing, clear fields of fire. Someone's planned this carefully." Elena's eyes tracked to Sophia, who was laughing as she painted a butterfly on a 5-year-old's cheek. 20 meters away. Too far if something went wrong. "We need to evacuate." "On what grounds?" "Festival's been going for 3 hours. Everything looks normal to anyone who doesn't know what to look for." A burst of feedback from the main stage's microphone system made several children cover their ears. But Elena noticed something else. 3 of the suspicious men had simultaneously reached for their earpieces. Coordinated response. Military communication. "David," she said urgently, "it's happening now." The first shots came from the roof of Patterson's Hardware, suppressed rifle fire that most of the crowd initially mistook for fireworks. Elena was already moving before the screaming started, her body responding to combat conditioning that 10 years of civilian life hadn't erased. "Sophia," she shouted, but her daughter was 30 meters away across a panicking crowd, still frozen in confusion as families scattered around her. A second gunman emerged from behind the Methodist church, his rifle tracking toward the cluster of children near the face-painting station. Elena saw his intention with perfect clarity: create maximum terror by targeting the most vulnerable. Her eyes swept the area with tactical precision. Deputy Morrison's patrol rifle, abandoned beside his squad car as he tried to establish a perimeter. 40 meters away, clean line of sight to the church gunman, wind negligible. Elena moved through the crowd like water through stones, her passage smooth and purposeful while chaos erupted around her. She reached Morrison's rifle as the deputy was shouting into his radio, calling for backup that wouldn't arrive in time. "Ma'am, get down," Morrison yelled when he saw her approaching his weapon. Elena ignored him. The rifle was a standard patrol carbine, iron sights, unfamiliar but functional. She dropped prone behind the engine block for cover and acquired her target in less than 2 seconds. The gunman at the church was lining up his shot on Sophia's group. Elena's breathing slowed to the rhythm she had learned in another life. Heartbeat steady, muscle tension controlled. The rifle became an extension of her will, and the distance collapsed to nothing. One shot, center mass. The gunman dropped immediately. The crowd's panic intensified, but Elena was already shifting to track the roof shooter. More difficult angle, elevated position, moving target. She adjusted for windage and elevation with instinctive precision, fired, and watched the second gunman tumble from Patterson's roof. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "Lady, who the hell are you?" Elena didn't answer. She was scanning for additional threats while moving toward Sophia, who stood motionless amid the fleeing festival-goers, staring at her mother with an expression of absolute shock. Elena Santos. The voice came from the bandstand's PA system, electronically amplified across the square. Or do you prefer Ramirez now? Either way, it's time we finished our conversation. Elena knew that voice. It belonged to nightmares she'd spent years trying to forget. Phantom 6, still saving strangers instead of the people who matter? Still playing hero while your world burns down around you? Elena reached Sophia and pulled her behind an overturned craft booth, her eyes never leaving the potential firing positions around the square. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking, how did you— "Later," Elena said tersely. "Right now, we survive." David appeared beside them, his service weapon drawn. "That voice," he said grimly. "I know it." "Marcus Vance," Elena confirmed. "Should have killed him in Afghanistan when I had the chance." "The contractor? The one who sold us out?" Elena nodded, her mind already calculating escape routes. But Marcus had chosen his moment well. The festival had created the perfect killing ground, with innocent civilians trapped in the crossfire. "People of Millfield, you've been harboring a killer in your midst. Elena Santos, your friendly neighborhood librarian, is responsible for the deaths of 13 men in Afghanistan. Ask her about Operation Ghost Dance. Ask her about the children who died because she couldn't make the hard choice." Each word was designed to wound, to isolate Elena from the community she'd tried to protect. And judging by the faces of the townspeople huddled around the square, it was working. "He's lying," Sophia said fiercely, though her voice held a note of uncertainty. Elena met her daughter's eyes. "Not about everything." The admission hit Sophia like a physical blow. But before she could respond, more gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Marcus's remaining men were closing in, using civilian panic as cover. Elena gripped Morrison's rifle and prepared to become someone she'd hoped never to be again. The Millfield Town Hall hadn't seen this much activity since the contentious zoning hearings of 2018. But the crowd gathering in its main conference room carried a different kind of tension. 24 hours after the Harvest Festival attack, the community was demanding answers. Mayor Evelyn Harper sat at the head of the polished oak table, her usually perfect composure showing cracks around the edges. To her right, Police Chief Martinez shuffled through incident reports with the expression of a man whose quiet jurisdiction had suddenly become a war zone. At the far end of the table, Elena sat alone, facing a room full of neighbors who now looked at her like she was a dangerous stranger.
"Let me see if I understand this correctly," Mayor Harper began, her voice carrying the controlled tension of a politician managing a crisis. "Mrs. Ramirez, you're telling us that you're actually Elena Santos, former military sniper, and that yesterday's attack was somehow related to your previous occupation?" "That's correct." Elena's voice was steady, but Sophia could see the exhaustion in her mother's posture. She'd spent the night at the police station, providing statements and tactical assessments, while the FBI established a perimeter around the town. "And you've been living here under false pretenses for 10 years, continued Tom Henderson, whose hardware store had been damaged in the shooting. "Lying to everyone who trusted you?" "I was protecting my daughter," Elena replied, "and this community. By bringing killers to our town?" Mrs. Patterson's voice was sharp with accusation. "My grandson was at that festival. He could have been hurt because you couldn't leave your war in Afghanistan where it belonged." Sophia felt the words like physical blows. She sat in the back row, officially too young to participate, but too involved to be excluded, watching her mother face a tribunal of former friends and neighbors. "Mom," Sophia stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Tell them about the children you saved yesterday. Tell them how you stopped those men from—" "Sophia, sit down," Elena said quietly. "No," Sophia's voice carried the same steel her mother had shown on the rifle range. "You saved lives yesterday. You protected people. Why won't you defend yourself?" Mayor Harper studied Elena with calculating eyes. "Mrs. Santos, or Ramirez, we appreciate your actions during the attack,
but we need to understand what we're dealing with. How many more enemies from your past might target our community? Elena met the mayor's gaze directly. I don't know. The admission sent a ripple of unease through the room. That's not acceptable, said Dr. Reynolds, who ran the medical clinic. We have families here, children. If you can't guarantee our safety, no one can guarantee safety, David Cole interrupted from his position near the door. He'd been silent until now, but his voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen combat. Sergeant Cole, Mayor Harper said carefully, do you have personal knowledge of Mrs. Santos's military service? David's pause lasted just long enough to confirm what everyone suspected. I do. And you didn't think the town had a right to know we were harboring a trained killer? I know we were protected by someone who put civilian lives above her own safety, someone who could have disappeared at the first sign of trouble but chose to stay and fight. Elena stood slowly, her movement commanding attention. You want the truth. Fine. My name is Elena Santos. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a designated marksman. I've killed people, military targets, enemy combatants who were trying to kill American soldiers. I came here to escape that life, to give my daughter a chance at normalcy. She looked around the room, meeting hostile and fearful gazes with quiet dignity. Yesterday, Marcus Vance brought my past to your doorstep. I'm sorry for that, but I won't apologize for defending this community or for choosing to make a life here. What happens now? Asked Janet Morrison, the deputy's wife. Do we post guards, evacuate our families, live in fear because you brought a war to Millfield? Elena was quiet for a long moment. I'll leave, she said finally. Tonight. Sophia and I will disappear and hopefully your town can return to normal. No, Sophia's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. This is our home. We belong here. Sophia! These people don't understand, Sophia continued, addressing the room directly. They think war is something that happens on TV, to other people. They don't realize that sometimes warriors come home and try to build something beautiful. They don't understand that my mother chose peace, chose this life, chose all of you. Her young voice carried surprising authority. Yesterday, she could have run. She could have grabbed me and disappeared, left you all to face those men alone. Instead, she picked up a rifle and reminded herself how to be someone she never wanted to be again, for you. The room was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Mayor Harper finally spoke. Mrs. Santos, or Ramirez, we appreciate your actions during the attack, but we need to understand what we're dealing with. How many more enemies from your past might target our community? Elena met the mayor's gaze directly. I don't know. The basement of the police station had been converted into an impromptu command center, complete with tactical maps and surveillance photos that transformed Millfield's familiar landmarks into potential battlegrounds. Elena sat across from David at a scarred wooden table, sharing coffee and the kind of conversation they had avoided for 10 years. Tell me about Afghanistan, David said quietly. Not the classified parts, just enough so I understand what we're up against.
Elena stared into her coffee, seeing reflected in its dark surface the mountains of Kandahar province. Operation Ghost Dance was supposed to be routine intelligence gathering. Our unit was tasked with surveillance of a suspected weapons cache in a village called Kala-A-Now. Marcus was our contracted liaison, David added. Local knowledge, cultural translation, tactical support. He was supposed to guide us to the target, Elena continued. Instead, he led us into an ambush. Taliban fighters had been waiting for hours, positioned on the high ground with clear fields of fire into the valley. Sophia, who had insisted on being included in this conversation, listened with the wide-eyed attention of someone learning her mother's true history. Rodriguez was my spotter, Elena said, her voice growing softer. Maria Rodriguez, from San Antonio, 22 years old, wanted to be a teacher when she got home. She was 15 meters to my left when the shooting started. Elena's hand unconsciously traced the scar on her left forearm. The ambush was perfectly planned. They knew our approach route, our communication frequencies, our extraction point. Marcus had sold us out for Taliban gold.
How did you survive?
Sophia asked. Elena saved us. 30 Taliban fighters in prepared positions, and she systematically eliminated their leadership until the rest broke and ran. 11 confirmed kills in 6 minutes, Elena said, matter-of-factly. But Maria died in the first volley. I couldn't save her.
That wasn't your fault.
Elena's laugh was bitter. Marcus made sure I knew otherwise. Before he disappeared with his Taliban allies, he told me Maria died because I hesitated, because I tried to wound his spotter instead of killing him outright. Said if I'd been more ruthless, Maria would still be alive.
He was manipulating you,
David said firmly. Maybe, but Maria was still dead, and I was the one who was supposed to protect her. Elena met Sophia's eyes. That's why I left the military. Why I erased Elena Santos and became Elena Ramirez. I couldn't live with being someone whose job was killing. Sophia was quiet for a long moment.
But you were protecting people.
Lines get blurry in war. Protecting people sometimes means destroying others. It changes you, makes you into someone you don't recognize. Is that why you became a librarian? Because libraries are about preserving things instead of destroying them? Elena smiled despite herself. Something like that. David spread surveillance photos across the table. Marcus surfaced in private military contracting after Afghanistan. Multiple corporate logos, but they all trace back to the same shell companies. He's been building a network, recruiting former special operations personnel with grievances against the system.
What does he want?
Sophia asked. Revenge, Elena said simply. Against me, against the military that abandoned him, against a world that didn't reward his particular talents. He's patient, David added. Spent years tracking you down, building intelligence on your new life. The attack yesterday wasn't about killing you, it was about exposing you, isolating you from the community you'd built. Elena studied the photos of Marcus's men, noting their professional gear and tactical positioning. He wants me to suffer before I die, wants to destroy everything I've built here.
Then we don't let him, Sophia said with fierce determination.
Elena looked at her daughter, this brave, stubborn young woman who'd inherited her father's artistic soul and her mother's warrior heart, and felt something shift inside her chest. For 10 years, she'd been running from Elena Santos. Maybe it was time to remember why that woman had been worth saving.
If we're going to fight, Elena said slowly, we'll need help. This town isn't prepared for what Marcus will bring.
David nodded. How long do we have?
Not long. Marcus likes psychological warfare, but he's not patient when it comes to the endgame. Elena stood and moved to the tactical map. He'll hit us hard and fast, probably within 48 hours. We need to prepare these people for a war they never saw coming. Can we evacuate? Sophia asked. Marcus will have exit routes covered. Besides, running now just means he follows us somewhere else, hurts more innocent people. Elena's finger traced potential defensive positions on the map. No, we make our stand here. She looked at David. Think you can convince the mayor to let a former military sniper train her citizens for combat? David's grin was grim but determined. Leave that to me. But Elena, once we do this, there's no going back to the quiet life. Elena thought of Maria Rodriguez, of the Taliban fighters she'd killed, of the 10 years she'd spent trying to become someone else. Maybe the quiet life was never really an option. The Millfield High School gymnasium had been transformed into something between a military training facility and a community crisis center. Folding tables displayed improvised weapons and first aid supplies, while chalk lines on the basketball court marked firing positions and cover points. The smell of gun oil mixed with industrial disinfectant created an atmosphere that belonged in a war zone, not a small Ohio town. Elena stood at center court, facing 37 volunteers who ranged from Sheriff's Deputy Morrison to Mrs. Patterson, the 70-year-old librarian emeritus. Their expressions varied from determined to terrified, but they'd all chosen to stay and fight rather than flee.
"I'm not going to lie to you," Elena began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd trained soldiers in life-or-death skills. "What's coming isn't going to be like movies or video games. It's going to be loud, confusing, and terrifying. Some of you might not make it through." A murmur of unease rippled through the group, but no one left. "However," Elena continued, "you have advantages Marcus doesn't expect. You know this terrain. You're fighting for your homes, your families, your community. And you have something most soldiers never get: time to prepare properly." Sophia sat in the bleachers, watching her mother transform into someone entirely different. Gone was the soft-spoken librarian who worried about overdue books. In her place stood a combat instructor whose every movement radiated competence and control. "First lesson," Elena said, picking up a hunting rifle from the table. "Weapon familiarization. How many of you have fired a gun before?" About half the hands went up, mostly hunters and farmers. "Good. But hunting deer is different from combat shooting. Deer don't shoot back." Elena's demonstration was swift and efficient, breaking down the rifle's operation with practiced ease. Combat is about controlled aggression, accurate fire under stress, and making every shot count. Tom Henderson raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do we know you're qualified to teach us this?" Elena's pause was barely perceptible. "Because I've done this before. Because I've trained soldiers who went on to save lives. And because the alternative is facing Marcus Vance's people with no preparation at all." "Tell them about your record," David suggested from his position near the door. He had been dividing his time between the training session and coordinating with state police. Elena shook her head. "Records don't matter. What matters is whether you can follow instructions, stay calm under pressure, and protect the person next to you." She divided the group into teams, mixing experienced hunters with complete novices, older townspeople with younger volunteers. The next 3 hours were intensive, covering everything from basic marksmanship to improvised explosive device recognition. Mayor Harper arrived midway through the session, her expression carefully neutral as she watched Elena demonstrate proper shooting stance to Dr. Reynolds. "Mrs. Santos, a word," the mayor said during a break. They moved to the relative privacy of the equipment room, where gymnastics mats and volleyball nets created barriers between them and the ongoing training. "I've been on the phone with the FBI," Mayor Harper said, without preamble. "They're treating this as a terrorist incident. Federal resources are being allocated." "Good. But federal response time to a small Ohio town is still measured in hours. We need to survive long enough for help to arrive. The Bureau wants to know your assessment of the threat level." Elena considered her words carefully. "Marcus has at least 12 trained operators, military-grade equipment, and a personal vendetta that's been building for 10 years. He's not going to be deterred by local law enforcement or the possibility of federal intervention." In other words, Mayor, this town is about to become a battleground, whether we like it or not. The question is whether we are going to be victims or defenders." Mayor Harper studied Elena's face, searching for something she couldn't quite identify. "You could have run, taken Sophia and disappeared. Why didn't you?" "Because running never solves anything. It just moves the problem somewhere else. I'm tired of running." Through the equipment room window, they could see Sophia helping Mrs. Patterson practice loading magazines. The teenager's movements were awkward but determined, and the elderly woman was paying attention with the focused intensity of someone who understood the stakes. "She's remarkable," Mayor Harper observed. "Your daughter. She has your strength, but without the weight. That's what I've been trying to protect. Her innocence. Her ability to see the world as a place where problems can be solved without violence. But you're teaching her to fight. I'm teaching her to survive. There's a difference." Mayor Harper was quiet for a moment, watching the unlikely sight of their small-town citizens preparing for war. "Mrs. Santos, I need to ask, when this is over, when Marcus Vance is no longer a threat, what happens then? Do you stay? Do you continue being Elena Ramirez, the librarian?" Elena had been asking herself the same question. "I don't know.
A lot depends on whether this community can accept who I really am. And who is that? She looked through the equipment room window at Sophia, who was laughing at something Deputy Morrison had said while cleaning her rifle. Her daughter was adapting to this new reality with the resilience of youth, but underneath the bravery, Elena could see the confusion and hurt of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered.
"I'm someone who spent 10 years trying to be normal," Elena said finally. "Someone who's discovering that maybe normal was never really an option." Mayor Harper nodded slowly. "Well, Mrs. Santos, for what it's worth, I think this community could use someone who understands that the world isn't always a safe place, someone who's willing to stand between the innocent and the people who would harm them." As if summoned by their conversation, Sophia appeared in the doorway. "Mom, Deputy Morrison wants to know about setting up overlapping fields of fire, and Mrs. Patterson asked if you could show her how to make improvised explosives from household chemicals." Elena stared at her daughter. Mrs. Patterson asked, "What?" Sophia's grin was slightly manic. "Turns out our town librarian has been reading some very interesting books about chemistry and engineering. She says if you're going to teach us to fight dirty, we might as well learn from an expert." Elena looked at Mayor Harper, who shrugged with the expression of someone whose quiet town had officially embraced chaos. "All right," Elena said, moving back toward the gymnasium. "Let's talk about defensive demolitions. But first, everyone needs to understand the fundamental rule of explosives." As she returned to her role as instructor, Elena realized that Elena Santos and Elena Ramirez were finally becoming the same person. For better or worse, the quiet life was officially over. The attack came at 2:47 a.m. on a moonless Tuesday, announced by the distant rumble of explosions that shattered Millfield's sleeping peace. Elena was already awake, positioned at her bedroom window with night vision binoculars, when the first charges detonated at the town's 3 main access roads. Marcus was cutting off escape routes. Her radio crackled to life, David's voice tight with controlled urgency. "Phoenix Base, this is Overwatch. Multiple explosions on Highway 32, Route 15, and Old Mill Road. Looks like shaped charges, professionally placed." "Confirmed, Overwatch." Elena's response was calm, automatic, the voice of someone who'd coordinated under fire before. "All units, Implementation Protocol 7, civilians to designated safe zones immediately." She moved through their house with practiced efficiency, gathering the gear she'd hoped never to need again. Her rifle case, hidden for 10 years beneath their basement stairs. Ammunition, body armor that still fit despite a decade of civilian life. The tools of Elena Santos emerging from their careful burial. Sophia appeared in the hallway, already dressed, her backpack ready. "Where do you need me?" "Safe house with the other civilians," Elena replied, checking her rifle's 0 for the 3rd time in 12 hours. "Like hell." Elena looked up sharply. "Sophia, you trained me yesterday. You said I was a natural with communications equipment. The civilian evacuation needs coordination, and I'm the only person under 60 who knows how to operate the new radio system." It was logical, tactical, and absolutely terrifying. Elena wanted to lock her daughter in the basement, but Sophia was right. The evacuation needed someone mobile, smart, and brave enough to move between safe points under fire. "Stay with Mrs. Patterson's group, and if I give you a direct order over the radio, you follow it immediately. No discussion." "Roger that, Mom." The use of military terminology from her 15-year-old daughter should have been jarring, but Elena was already shifting into combat mode, her mind automatically cataloging resources and threats. Outside, Millfield was transforming into a battlefield. Streetlights had been systematically destroyed, plunging residential areas into darkness. Fires burned at strategic intersections where Marcus's man had positioned vehicle barriers. In the distance, automatic weapons fire created a deadly percussion that sent civilians fleeing toward predetermined safe zones. Elena reached her assigned position, the bell tower of St. Mary's Episcopal Church, which offered commanding views of the town's northern approaches. David was already there, setting up a spotting scope and communication relay. 12 confirmed hostiles so far. Tactical movement, coordinated fire teams. They're herding civilians toward the town center. Elena settled into her shooting position, the familiar weight of her rifle both comforting and terrifying. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from 3 different positions, Marcus's men advancing with tactical precision through residential streets. "First target," she murmured, acquiring a figure moving between houses. 200 meters.
moving left to right. The shot was clean, dropping the hostile immediately. But even as she shifted to engage the next target, Elena knew they were outnumbered and outgunned. Her radio crackled with Sophia's voice. "Phoenix Base, evacuation control. Mrs. Henderson's group is pinned down at the community center. They need covering fire to reach the high school." Elena's jaw tightened. The community center was 600 meters away, at the extreme range of effective covering fire. But Sophia was right. Without support, those civilians would be trapped in the open. "Overwatch, can you spot for long-range engagement?" "Affirm. I see 3 hostiles with overlapping fields of fire. This is going to be technical." Elena adjusted her scope and controlled her breathing. 600 meters in urban terrain with civilians in the danger zone and limited visibility. The kind of shot that required absolute precision.
3 shots, 3 seconds apart. 3 confirmed kills. "Evacuation control, Phoenix Base. Your route is clear. Move now." But even as Mrs. Henderson's group reached safety, Marcus's voice echoed across the town through hijacked emergency broadcast speakers. Elena Santos, still hiding behind civilians, still pretending to be their protector while your war destroys their peaceful lives? The psychological warfare was as precise as his tactical assault, designed to isolate Elena from the community she was trying to defend. "Citizens of Millfield," Marcus continued, "your librarian has brought death to your quiet town. How many of your neighbors must die for her sins?" Elena keyed her radio. "All units, maintain positions. Do not let him divide us." But she could see the effect of Marcus's words. Some of the volunteer defenders were wavering, looking toward her position with expressions of doubt and fear. That's when Sophia's voice cut through the static with surprising authority. "All stations, this is evacuation control. The enemy is trying to break our unity with lies and fear. Remember who picked up a rifle to defend our children yesterday. Remember who taught us to fight back instead of running away." Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Her daughter understood the real battle being fought, not just for territory, but for the soul of their community. The siege continued through the night, a deadly chess match played across familiar streets. Elena and David provided overwatch while the train volunteers held defensive positions, protecting evacuation routes and safe zones. They were holding, but barely. As dawn approached, Elena caught sight of a familiar figure moving across a rooftop 3 blocks away. Marcus Vance, finally revealing himself, positioning for what she knew would be their final confrontation. "David," she said quietly, "it's time." The rooftop of Patterson's Hardware offered a clear field of fire across most of downtown Millfield, which was exactly why Marcus had chosen it for their final duel. Elena approached from the fire escape, her rifle slung across her back, knowing this confrontation had been inevitable since the moment she'd revealed herself at the Harvest Festival. Marcus stood at the roof's edge, silhouetted against the dawn sky, his own rifle held in a casual ready position. He'd aged since Afghanistan, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but he still moved with the predatory confidence that had made him so dangerous as an ally and so lethal as an enemy. "Phantom 6, he called out, not turning to face her. "Right on time. You always were predictable." "Marcus." Elena's voice carried no warmth, no recognition of their shared history. "It's over. Your men are dead or captured. There's nowhere left to run." Marcus laughed, finally turning to face her. "Run? Elena, I'm exactly where I want to be. Just you and me, the way it should have been 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you betrayed your own unit for Taliban gold. I adapted to circumstances, while you clung to outdated notions of honor and duty. Tell me, how did that work out for Maria Rodriguez?" The name hit Elena like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. "Maria died because you sold us out. Maria died because you hesitated. In the village, when you had a clear shot on their sniper, you chose to wound instead of kill. Gave him time to put a bullet through Rodriguez's head." Her hands remained steady on her rifle, but Marcus's words were reopening wounds she'd spent a decade trying to heal. "You know what the difference is between us?" Marcus continued, beginning to circle her position. "I understand that war is about winning, whatever the cost. You still believe in fairy tales about good and evil, right and wrong.
I believe in protecting innocent people. Like the Taliban fighters in Kala now, they were protecting their village from foreign invaders. Were they evil, or were you? Elena shifted position, maintaining distance between them while keeping Marcus in her sight picture. They were combatants who chose to engage American forces. And the children in the village? When your counterattack leveled half their homes, were those children combatants too? Below them, Elena could hear the sounds of her community rallying, David coordinating with arriving federal agents, Sophia helping tend to wounded civilians, ordinary people who'd found extraordinary courage when their homes were threatened. The difference between us, Marcus, is that I've spent 10 years trying to build something instead of destroying it. Marcus raised his rifle with fluid precision. And look how well that worked out. Your quiet life is over, Elena. Your daughter will grow up knowing her mother is a killer. This community will never trust you again. You've lost everything that mattered to you. No, Elena replied, her own weapon coming to firing position. I've remembered what I was fighting for in the first place. The shot came without warning, Marcus's finger tightening on the trigger as Elena threw herself sideways, using the roof's ventilation system for cover. His bullet sparked off metal inches from her head.
What followed was a deadly ballet played out across the rooftop's obstacles. Both shooters moved with the fluid precision of professionals, using cover and concealment while seeking that perfect angle for a killing shot. Elena's radio crackled with David's voice. "Phoenix Base, federal assets are in position. You have support standing by." "Negative," Elena replied, rolling behind an air conditioning unit as Marcus's next shot shattered concrete nearby. "This is personal. Keep everyone clear." Marcus appeared around the edge of a rooftop access door, his rifle tracking toward Elena's position. "Still playing the lone hero? Still thinking you can save everyone?" Elena's return shot forced him back into cover. "I'm thinking I can stop you from hurting anyone else." The duel continued with deadly intensity, each shooter testing the other's skills and patience. Marcus had the advantage of familiarity. He'd spent months planning this confrontation, studying the terrain, preparing for exactly this scenario. But Elena had something he didn't expect: peace with her choices. "You want to know the truth about Maria?" Elena called out during a brief lull. "She died because evil men like you exist in the world, and people like me exist to stop you." Marcus emerged from cover for his final gambit, counting on his superior position and Elena's emotional vulnerability. It was the kind of calculated risk that had served him well in Afghanistan. It was also a mistake. Elena's shot was perfect, center mass, no hesitation, the kind of precision that had once made her legendary among snipers. Marcus dropped immediately, his rifle clattering across the rooftop tiles. In the sudden silence that followed, Elena could hear her daughter's voice on the radio. "Mom? Mom, are you okay?" Elena keyed her transmitter with steady hands. "Phoenix Base is secure. All hostiles neutralized." As she stood over Marcus's body, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 10 years. The certainty that some fights were worth finishing. 3 weeks after the siege, Millfield looked almost normal again. The barricades had been removed, the damaged buildings were under repair, and the federal investigation had concluded with commendations for the community's heroic defense. But something fundamental had changed in the quiet Ohio town, and in Elena Santos Ramirez. She stood in her library office, mounting her rifle in a custom display case that would hang behind her desk. Not hidden this time, but displayed, with quiet pride, alongside her military decorations and a framed photograph of Maria Rodriguez. "You sure about that?" David asked from the doorway. He wore civilian clothes now. He'd accepted a position as Elena's partner in the new civilian defense training program the mayor had approved. "I'm sure," Elena replied, adjusting the display case's angle. "No more secrets. No more pretending to be someone I'm not. Sophia appeared beside David, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd found peace with difficult truths. The last of the insurance adjusters left this morning, and Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you're still planning the tactical first aid workshop next week. Tell her yes, and remind her that improvised explosive devices are for defense only. I'll make sure she understands, Sophia said solemnly, then grinned. Though I think she's planning to write a romance novel about a librarian who's secretly a sniper. She asked if she thought you'd be willing to provide technical consultation. God help us all, David muttered. Elena settled behind her desk, looking out at the library's main floor, where children were once again reading peacefully while their parents browsed the stacks. The normalcy was real, but it was no longer built on ignorance or denial. "Any word from the FBI about other cells?" David asked. "Marcus's network is being rolled up systematically. Turns out our little siege provided enough intelligence to identify his entire operation. The threat to this community is over." "And the threat to you personally?" Elena considered the question. "There's always going to be someone from my past who has a score to settle. But I'm not running anymore. This is home." Sophia set down her coffee and fixed her mother with a serious look. "Mom, I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Will you teach me to shoot? Really shoot, I mean, not just the basics we learned during the crisis." Elena studied her daughter's face, seeing determination and maturity that hadn't been there a month ago. "Why?" "Not because I want to hurt anyone," she said carefully, "but because I want to be able to protect people, like you do. And because—" she paused, searching for words. "Because I want to understand that part of you better." Elena was quiet for a long moment, remembering her own motivation for picking up a rifle for the first time, the desire to protect others, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. "All right," she said finally, "but we do it properly. Safety first, precision second, and only for defense. Deal."
David cleared his throat. "Speaking of training, Mayor Harper has officially approved the expansion of our program. 3 neighboring counties want to send people for instruction." "The quiet librarian turned tactical trainer," Elena mused. "Maria would have found that hilarious." "I think she would have been proud," David said gently. Elena looked at the photograph on her desk. Maria Rodriguez smiling beside their shared rifle, young and eager and forever frozen in that moment before betrayal and death had changed everything. "Maybe," Elena said, "but mostly I think she would have wanted me to keep protecting people. That's what we signed up for in the first place." Sophia moved to the window, looking out at the town square where workers were installing a memorial to the civilians who'd shown courage during the siege. "Mom, do you regret it? Any of it?" Elena followed her daughter's gaze, seeing their community going about its daily business with the quiet confidence of people who'd faced the worst and survived. "I regret the deception," she said honestly. "I regret the fear and confusion my secrets caused. But I don't regret becoming Elena Ramirez, building a life here, raising you in this community. Even knowing it couldn't last? Nothing lasts forever, Sophia, but some things are worth building anyway." That evening, as Elena locked the library and walked home through streets that were once again safe, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Elena Santos, the sniper, and Elena Ramirez, the librarian, had finally become the same person, someone who understood that peace was worth fighting for, that some battles chose you rather than the other way around. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Range time tomorrow? Mrs. Patterson wants to work on her long-distance accuracy." Elena laughed, typing back, "Absolutely, but no explosives training until she finishes her romance novel."
As she reached her front door, Sophia appeared with homework and the comfortable chaos of teenage life. But now their conversations included discussions of tactical medicine alongside algebra, and their evening routine incorporated equipment maintenance along with household chores. It wasn't the quiet life Elena had originally sought, but it was something better. An honest life, built on the foundation of who she really was, rather than who she'd tried to become. And sometimes, late at night when she checked the perimeter out of old habit, Elena would think she could hear Maria Rodriguez's voice in the wind, approving of the choices that had led her home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.